22M. Suspect there's something going on between my girlfriend, 22F, and my friend, 21M. We all live together, and I'm really freaking out right now because if my suspicion is accurate, this living arrangement is about to get really complicated. Please tell me I'm just paranoid. Apologies if this is lengthy. Background. We are two couples living together, and we all attend the same university. The apartment was initially leased by my girlfriend of about 2 years, Alexis, 20F, and our mutual friend Brooke, 22F. The apartment is enormous and costly. There were originally supposed to be 3 girls living there, but the third one backed out abruptly. They were considering moving somewhere cheaper but had invested a lot of work into the apartment and loved it so much that they hated the idea of leaving. I offered to move in when my lease was up in May, so we could divide the rent and utilities 3 ways. I was already spending the night frequently, and both girls were absolutely thrilled about the idea. Shortly before I moved in, Brooke started dating my best friend, Derek. This was great because now both couples got to hang out with their best friends and significant others all at once. It seemed perfect. Derek began spending the night often, and when his parents sold their house and left in October, he temporarily moved in. We haven't really urged him to find a new place because splitting everything 4 ways is benefiting all of us so much. But again, only Alexis and Brooke are on the lease. The apartment owner surprisingly does not mind as long as rent gets paid because we are always quiet. There are 3 incidents that made me suspect something. If it weren't for these combined incidents, I would never make an accusation like this because Alexis is such a sweet and shy woman and Derek has been like a brother to me. They don't seem flirty, but as I mentioned before, all 4 of us are very close friends, so we spend a lot of time together. Incident 1. Brooke and I have early classes, so we're gone by 8 a.m. Derek and Alexis begin their afternoons together, so it's customary for them to leave simultaneously, though they typically drive separately. One day, I waited outside Alexis's class to surprise her with lunch. I observed everyone exiting the class, but Alexis wasn't among them. I texted her asking where she was, and she replied she had just gotten out of class and was going home to study. I called her to see if I had just missed her, but there was no answer, which struck me as odd because she had just texted me moments ago. She didn't respond until much later, which is out of character for her. She's one of those girls who's often on her phone. I bumped into Brooke later, and she mentioned casually that Derek was homesick and she was going to bring him soup and such. At that moment, I didn't think much of it. When I returned home later that evening, I noticed Alexis's car was in the same spot she usually parks in. I asked her if she had attended class, and she became quiet before sheepishly admitting she had skipped because she felt the professor was terrible at explaining things. She knows I dislike it when she skips classes. It's affected her grades before, although she's improved recently. I kissed her and said I trusted her judgment. While I was washing dishes, she mentioned she probably wouldn't skip again because being bored alone in the house was awful. I laughed, and we went about our evening. Later, as we were drifting off to sleep, it hit me she shouldn't have been alone because Derek was homesick, right? She was still up on her phone, so I suddenly asked her where Derek was since Brooke had said he was homesick. She seemed startled by the question, but that might have been because I was half asleep and then suddenly wide awake with a random question. She mentioned he had been around a bit in the morning, but left to handle errands or something. She wasn't certain. Following the other incidents, I perceived that the disorganized way she replied to this question felt strange, but it might just be my imagination. Incident 2. I was tossing some stuff into the kitchen trash when I spotted a condom wrapper that was the same brand Alexis and I use. It wasn't very visible, kind of tucked behind a cereal box, but the distinct color caught my eye. Brooke and Derek usually use a different brand, free from the University Health Center, while ours are expensive Trojans. It was odd because we typically keep the wrappers in our own rooms, trash cans, so they never end up in the kitchen. Additionally, due to exams and overall stress, Alexis and I hadn't been intimate in a few days. I didn't really dig around for a used condom or anything. I just returned to the room to check if any of ours were missing. I couldn't tell for sure because we buy them in bulk. My initial thought was that Brooke and Derek had run out and taken from our stash, and I was upset that they didn't even ask. Later that evening, I brought up the condom wrapper to Alexis, and her eyes widened when I mentioned my theory. She became unusually distressed. She's always very calm and ranted about them violating our privacy. I suggested we talk to them about it, and she immediately rejected the idea and made me promise not to mention it unless they did it again. She didn't want to have this awkward conversation, which seemed strange to me because we usually are pretty open about sex considering we live together. Though it's possible that Alexis was being genuine since she's from a conservative small town and doesn't discuss these things as much as we do. Incident 3. Derek and I are cool with the guys in the apartment next to us who are graduates from our university. We don't socialize or anything, but we have the kind of relationship where we engage in small talk about sports or whatever in the hallway and feel comfortable asking each other to keep the noise down without it being strange. Last Monday, during our break, I was locking up when no one else was at the apartment, and I ran into one of the guys from next door. We chatted about football for a bit, and then he mentioned that one of the couples in the apartment is really into morning sex and that the walls were way too thin. I laughed because Alexis and I usually had sex on weekend mornings when we had the house to ourselves. Brooke and Derek usually spend weekends at her parents' house about an hour and a half away. The more I thought about it later in the day, the more I realized we hadn't been having morning sex in about a month on the weekends. It had been more towards the evening, or not at all. Did he mean on weekdays? My heart sort of sank. I kind of want to ask him to explain further, but the conversation ended, and I feel like I missed my chance. Plus, it's a weird thing to ask, and I feel like I must be paranoid. So there you have it. Am I crazy? Am I looking for signs that aren't there? Or is something up? If so, how do I proceed? I don't want to ask her just yet because 1. I don't want to come off as crazy and jealous if nothing's up, and 2. If something is up, I don't want them to start hiding it better. I was thinking of dropping by one of those mornings when they're alone together, but I don't know how to time it right. If I drop by too early or late, they might get more cautious. Update 1. The majority of you suggested that I speak to Brooke or attempt to walk in on the act. I decided on doing both. Sunday night, everyone was back in the apartment. I had every intention of speaking to Brooke about the neighbor's comment alone, but before I could, she said something that completely threw my theory off. She told Derek to get to bed, so he wouldn't be tired for work in the morning. What? I knew Derek had a job on campus, but he had always worked the same night shifts. Trying to be casual, I inquired how long he'd been working mornings and when he started. He said he began the extra shifts a month ago, starting at 9 o'clock. I leave at 7:45, so it's possible I hadn't noticed. I spent the rest of the evening trying to figure out if he was being truthful, if he had some mornings here at home, if Alexis could be seeing someone other than Derek in the mornings, as some of you suggested, or if I was just overly paranoid. I went to bed feeling emotionally exhausted and confused. The next morning, I left for classes as usual and went through the motions on autopilot. I kept switching between the idea of running home to check on Alexis and thinking I had too much work to run around based on a theory that I was no longer sure about. Eventually, I walked out of my first class and straight to my car to go home. In a weird way, I almost wish I hadn't. When I arrived at the apartment, Derek's car wasn't there, just Alexis's. I walked to the apartment with my heart pounding wildly. I didn't know what to expect. Outside the apartment door, I could immediately hear a man's voice inside. I heard him talking and laughing, and a soft feminine mumble replying and giggling back. I've been on this subreddit long enough to see the different reactions people have to this situation. I never once contemplated what I'd do. I pressed my ear to the door and tried to make out what they were saying, but I could only catch a word here and there. There was a lot of giggling. Then I heard the sound of Alexis being tickled and shrieking. Maybe I should have waited longer. Looking back, I wish I did, but I couldn't handle it. As soon as I started fiddling with my keys, it went dead silent inside. She was effing Mark. I never mentioned Mark in the earlier post, but he's one of the guys in the apartment next to ours. Not the one who tipped me off. He's the only one I never liked. Arrogant, no. It all jerk attitude, and he always made crude remarks towards both girls. I never thought much of it. As soon as I opened the door, they both gave me a deer in headlights look that erased any remaining naive doubt I might have retained that the scenario was innocent. I was intending to yell at them or demand answers, but, and this is incredibly embarrassing, my eyes began to fill with tears. I didn't want them to see that, so I said, "Nice. Real effing nice," and bolted back to my car. I heard Alexis shouting my name in the hallway and picked up the pace. I sort of expected her to be chasing me, but by the time I got to the car, no one was following me. I drove to a park near the apartment and sat there in disbelief. My first thought, strangely enough, was how my family was going to handle this. What the hell am I going to tell them? My family effing adored Alexis. They joked about our wedding and often called her part of the family. Then I started thinking about living arrangements. Our finals end in about 2 weeks. There's no way I can handle moving now. I'm applying to an incredibly competitive graduate program, and I can't let anything interfere with that. Definitely not this cheating woman. I'm writing this from a friend's house. I explained the situation, and he explained it to his parents, and they welcomed me into their home. I'm going to have to go back home to get some clothes at some point. I'm planning on going during a lab period. I know Alexis can't skip tomorrow. It took her an hour or so to start blowing up my phone, but once she did, it didn't stop. She began by asking me to come home so she could explain. Before I even had the opportunity to respond, she sent another message begging me to return because she was having an anxiety attack. Something I always assist her through. Maybe I'm heartless, but all I could think was, good, you deserve it. There was a pause, and then she sent, I don't know why you get so jealous. We were just hanging out. I waited. She sent, look, I know it looks super suspicious. Believe me, if I were you, I'd think the same thing, but we didn't do anything. He needed advice on his girl problems. You have to believe me. No, I don't. Normally, I would have gotten a weird sense of satisfaction watching a cheater scramble to cover their tracks, but my mind just kept replaying all the wonderful times we had together and wondering if she was cheating then, too. I want to know when this began, but at the same time, I'm worried it's been going on for longer than the month I've suspected. I received a text later that night from a number I didn't recognize. It was the neighbor from next door. He said, paraphrasing because it was a long text, that he got my number from Derek. He was extremely sorry for what I was going through and that he would have told me sooner, but he wasn't completely sure. He said he knew his friend was seeing a girl with a boyfriend but didn't put it together until he learned the girl's name. As many of you suspected, the comment was him trying to tip me off. So yeah, I guess he's bro of the year. I don't think Derek and Brooke know yet. I haven't texted them. I haven't found the words. I know it's going to turn our living arrangement and friendships upside down. I guess I should message them before Alexis paints a different picture. I wonder what the cool neighbor said when he asked for my number. I don't think he told them. They would have said something, right? Unless they took her side, then I've lost my girlfriend and friends. Any advice on dealing with something like this, especially from those with prior experience, would be appreciated. I don't have many friends to rely on besides the guy I'm staying with. Alexis, Brooke, and Derek were essentially my family. Alexis and I had discussed spending our lives together. I've never been serious about a girl the way I was with her. Edit. I am deeply moved by the amount of support you all are showing me here. Please keep it coming. I may not respond to every comment, but I've read each one on both posts. I'm going to inform Derek and Brooke soon. I'll try to do a follow-up when I have some sort of plan. Update 2. Between the comments on both posts and my inbox, I have an immense collection of personalized pep talks which I refer to whenever I feel down, which is a lot these days. I received advice and stories from all kinds of people, married, single, old, young. Wow, I never imagined the internet could provide this level of support. I just want you all to know that by typing up some comments, you have made a very real difference in someone's life. I have to say it feels a little strange receiving 6 Reddit gold and making it to best of, just for sharing the worst day of my life. I got a lot of messages urging me to join red pill groups. This experience has soured my view of Alexis, not women in general. I received some messages saying I write too well, and this is obviously fabricated. I have 2 words for you. I wish. A clarification on the last update. I wasn't clear about what I saw when I walked in. They weren't literally having sex. They were just sitting on the couch with a deer in headlights look. That was incredibly incriminating, and they both went quiet. It was clearly not a hey, guess who dropped by situation. Anyway, on to the update. I've been extremely busy with the semester ending, and I took the majority's advice to bury my head in work. I've been spending a considerable amount of time at the library since Alexis avoids it entirely. While I was posting the latest update, it hit me how foolish it was not to have reached out to Derek and Brooke to give my side of the story. I took a screenshot of the text from my friendly neighbor. All names have been altered except for Mark, because F you, Mark. Within a minute, Derek's calls and messages were blowing up my phone, making it clear he was unaware of anything. Concurrently, Alexis was sending messages pleading for a meetup. Feeling awful, I replied to Derek with a single message saying I wasn't up for talking and then put my phone away for the night. The next morning, I received a text inviting me to meet him at my favorite restaurant for dinner and drinks on him, promising that no one else would be there, not even Brooke. While I hadn't had any appetite since everything happened, the gesture meant a lot, and I genuinely wanted to see him, so I decided to go after my classes. Arriving at the restaurant first, I was anxious, almost expecting Alexis to show up somehow, but she didn't. Derek came up, gave me a big hug, and started with, "Dude, what the F?" This is where things get a bit wild and dramatic. Many of you speculated that Brooke might be siding with Alexis or had been covering for her all along. I wasn't certain, as although she is closer to Alexis, Brooke and I have been friends longer. According to Derek, as soon as he told Brooke, she was absolutely furious. In his words, I kinda wanted to confront Alexis, but Brooke handled it and then some. Recall I mentioned Alexis came from a conservative small town. Her parents had no clue we were living together, and she was constantly stressed that if they found out, they'd cut her off financially. They liked me well enough to be civil, but were always concerned that a relationship might distract her from school and didn't want her getting pregnant or anything like that. Derek mentioned that Brooke demanded Alexis pack her belongings and find a new place where she would contact her parents and disclose everything. Derek shared with me that later that evening, Alexis was in the living room clutching a sweater I had left behind and crying loudly that her life was over when Brooke shouted from her room, "Well, maybe you shouldn't have effed Mark." Imagining that moment was somewhat amusing. Brooke has always been a very straightforward girl with a fiery temper, but I certainly didn't expect this. It was highly touching that she took the cheating so seriously. During that dinner, all my fears of losing my friends completely dissipated, and I was able to eat a few pieces of sushi. When we left dinner, Derek promised to inform me when Alexis had left so I could move back in. I turned down his offer because, even if she does move out, everything in that apartment reminds me of her, including Derek and Brooke. Alexis and Mark probably had sex in my room, so I really don't want to sleep in it in my current emotional state. I don't want to be the third wheel to a happy couple, even though I'm sure they'd be considerate. He understood my reasons, but asked me to let him know if I change my mind. Since Brooke and Alexis' friendship appears to be over, this week has been relatively uneventful. I keep having to avoid Alexis. Fortunately, I'm in an undergraduate program with only 60 students, so we don't share many classes. I asked 2 friends to keep an eye out for her after giving them a brief summary of the story and started arriving to class at the last minute. As far as I know, she only waited outside one of my classes. I received a text saying Alexis had been spotted in front of the classroom. Waterworks in progress. Proceed with caution. I ended up skipping the class because I didn't know if she was going to leave, and I really didn't want to take the risk. Later that evening, she sent me a lengthy Facebook message detailing everything from the start, and it made me feel nauseated to read. I considered not reading it, but once I started, I felt compelled to finish. She explained that Mark had been flirtatious with her in the hallways. As I mentioned before, he would say inappropriate things to both girls, and she tried to be friendly back, but it must have come off as flirting because he kissed her mid-conversation one day. She admitted she felt guilty that she led him on and that guilt prevented her from rejecting his future advances because she felt it was her fault. She claimed they had slept together only 3 times and she hated it, saying he had pressured her into it. Not rape, but something she never explicitly agreed to. She was going to end it during the conversation I walked in on. She said she understood if I needed some time and space, but would do absolutely anything to make it right and would spend the rest of her life making it up to me by treating me like a king. I'd never have to cook, clean, or do my laundry again. She offered full access to her phone and passwords, suggested we install a tracking app so I would know where she is at all times, and promised to cut off all contact with Mark and all her male friends. She even offered make-up sex whenever I wanted. Yeah, that sounds like a healthy relationship, right? I didn't respond. I sort of wanted to keep her on Facebook and watch the mess unfold. She was posting dramatic statuses and song lyrics about mistakes, forgiveness, and some from our song, but knowing myself, I didn't want to compulsively check her page or go through old photos, so I blocked her. Derek sent me a text a few hours later saying she was crying and screaming about me blocking her. In happier news, the family I'm staying with is fantastic. I felt somewhat guilty about using their space, electricity, and other resources, so I offered to pay rent and contribute to some bills. I am jobless, but my family provides me with a decent allowance for rent and groceries. However, they refused my offer. The dad said, "First month's on the house. If you need more time here, then we'll discuss it," and winked. My friend mentioned they have hosted troubled friends of his and his sisters, so it wasn't a big deal to them. Still, I am incredibly grateful. Regarding my amazing neighbor, I called him to express my gratitude for everything. I wasn't ready to invite him over for dinner just yet, but I will eventually. He apologized profusely and mentioned he loathes Mark, not just for what he did with Alexis, but for several other reasons that I won't elaborate on. He informed me that Mark has been unusually quiet lately and told another guy that he was dumped. Whatever. I don't want to dwell on it. So that's basically all I have to update you on. I am still going to remain friends with Derek and Brooke, but I will limit my contact with them because they remind me too much of Alexis. I sent a message to Brooke thanking her for kicking Alexis out, and she said she would have done it regardless of whether I moved back in or not. She is going to give me a heads up when Alexis is gone so I can retrieve the rest of my belongings. In the meantime, I am spending a lot of time studying, applying to graduate schools, and hanging out with the guy I'm living with. Earlier this week, I posted in my university's Facebook group looking for roommates for the next semester, and I have already received a few responses. I am going to wait until after finals to inform my parents about the situation because my mom bombards me with a million questions, and I am not in the mood to answer them right now. Again, thank you so much for all the messages. I did not expect this level of attention, and while it has made me a bit paranoid that someone will recognize the story from the details, I needed the support. I appreciate you all. Update. Well, I really wasn't planning on updating, but a number of you have pushed for one, and I do owe you guys after all the wonderful support I received. Once finals concluded, I did well given the circumstances. Everything hit me like a ton of bricks, almost worse than the initial insult. I erased all my social media pictures with her, disposed of things that reminded me of her, and removed our songs from my playlists. We had been inseparable since we met, so this was over 2 years of accumulated memories. Long story short, it was very tough, but I felt a strong need to get it all done before the new year. That whole cliche of new year. New me, I guess. I received a message from a Redditor suggesting that Alexis might be driven to suicide now that she's lost everything. Her closest friends, her boyfriend, in her apartment. It seemed like an overdramatic prediction, but I couldn't shake it after reading it. What Alexis did was absolutely terrible, but I thought a final conversation might give me better closure and perhaps help her understand that it's completely over and get her to move on. So I planned to meet with her before everyone left for break. A lot of you suggested icing her out, so I'm genuinely sorry to disappoint, but I had to do this for me. I sent Alexis a message saying that if she wanted to talk, we could meet up somewhere, but there was no way we could be together after what happened, so please don't ask. She responded almost immediately, asking when and where. We arranged to meet at an off-campus coffee place. When I arrived, she was already at a table and got up to hug me. I waved her away, and she recoiled like a puppy that had been kicked. I felt shitty immediately, but I wanted to get it over with. We made some trivial small talk. She asked how I'd been, how finals went, etc., but I sort of interrupted it. I asked her if she'd been unhappy with our relationship. Her eyes got really wide, and she said no several times before going quiet. So I asked her why, if she wasn't unhappy. Basically, she retold the story about having trouble saying no and him being very pushy. I stopped her and asked her to drop the excuses and take responsibility. Maybe that explained her actions up until he kissed her mid-sentence. But 3 times of sex? Yeah, no. She looked down, shrugged, and muttered, "You're right." At this point, she started tearing up and said she was so sorry that I would never understand how sorry she was. Then she asked if there was any chance we could be together again, which I kind of expected, even though I told her not to. I just shook my head. I told her she could still live with Derek and Brooke if she wanted, but she declined and told me she already had plans to move in with another girlfriend of hers. From there, the conversation went in circles with her trying to explain away her actions with her difficulty turning down guys due to her fear of being seen as a prude, and me trying to get her to admit that excuse was garbage. I don't know why, but I really needed her to stop using that crutch and admit she had ruined a perfectly good relationship with a very real future all on her own. But she just wouldn't. She was always stubborn. Finally, I let it go, and we parted ways somewhat amicably. As I was leaving, she grabbed my hand and parted her lips to say something, but ended up shaking her head and letting go. The conversation initially made me feel worse than I had before, but ultimately, it really made me see that she was never the kind of person I wanted to be with. Even without the cheating, she never took responsibility for anything. Failed classes were because the professor was incompetent, not finding a job or internship was bad luck, and not her lack of effort, etc. I just never really thought about it too hard. I think I was still in the honeymoon phase or something. I'm an idiot sometimes. After leaving the coffee shop, I asked Derek to hang out. I ended up going to the apartment, and although Brooke was there, she mostly stayed in her room. We drank some beers and played video games, which really lifted my spirits. We also discussed everything that had transpired. He admitted that they hadn't been able to find a third roommate aside from complete strangers they'd rather not move in with, and asked me again to stay with them. I could tell he really wanted me to, and I felt bad about them being stuck with the lease, so I agreed. I told them I needed to wait until Alexis took all her things, though. The furniture is hers from before I even moved in, and I still don't want to sleep in that bed. Also, Brooke apologized for getting so involved in the situation and yelling at Alexis. Apparently, her stepdad had cheated on her mom, and it's a sore subject for her. I told her I genuinely didn't mind, and she was welcome to do it again if the mood struck her. I also bought Will some food and drinks at a great place near campus. Many of you wanted to know the other issues Mark had caused that had Will so pissed off. Apparently, he had to be harassed to pay rent, claimed he couldn't contribute to any household expenses like dish soap, light bulbs, cleaning supplies, and regularly came in yelling and laughing at odd hours, agreeing to keep it down but then carrying on at the same volume. Standard douchebag roommate crap. Will is a really cool guy. We talked a lot about the situation with Alexis, but also about school and sports. It was actually pretty fun. I eventually told my folks about the situation, and as expected, my mom bombarded me with 1,000 questions and cried a lot, so that was fun. Going home relieved me somewhat, but my elder brother got engaged on Christmas Eve. Given the events, I wasn't as enthusiastic for him as I should have been, which made me feel like a lousy sibling. Additionally, it's all my family discusses now, and I'm just not interested. Life isn't perfect now, but I'm improving. Alexis moved her stuff out, and I bought a second-hand bed and dresser from another student. I had my first set of classes last week, and although I'm going to sound like a total nerd, the courses are really fascinating, hands-on, and the professors are incredibly awesome individuals. Derek and Brooke have been very supportive and don't make me feel like a third wheel at all. I saw Mark in the hallway once, and he completely ignored me, and I ignored him. But the urge to punch him in the face was very real. I suppose that's something that will fade with time. I almost wanted to confront him about the whole situation, but with the kind of person Will had described, the conversation would have gotten me nowhere and probably infuriated me further. Sorry this update isn't as thrilling as the previous ones. Thank you for your love and support. It really, really helped me through such a tough time.